According to the U.S. Census Bureau, there are now more millennials than baby boomers. And when it comes to voting, the women of this generation are being watched incredibly carefully because their impact could be huge. They're vocal about all the issues that they care about: college affordability, healthcare, guns, the job market, and the list goes on. The critical question we'll be looking at is how engaged are they in politics, and how do the political players better understand this key demographic? We have a great lineup to contemplate these questions with us tonight. We're going to begin with John Della Volpe. He's Director of Polling at the Harvard Institute of Politics. He has a brand new poll on millennials. Here to explore his findings with him are Refinery29's Executive Editor, Global News, Kaylin Ford. Welcome, Kaylin. And my colleague, Atlantic Senior Editor, Alex Wagner. Take it away.
Thank you guys for joining us. It's called a cocktail caucus for a reason. I hope to see a glass of wine clutched in every hand by the end of this. It will make it that much more enjoyable. Not that you can't do it sober, but I say with a bottle of Pellegrino, such a traitor. Okay, we have the brilliant and wise John Della Volpe here.
Old. Wise means old?
Wise just means you know a lot more than most people. And let's just kick it off with, you have two halves of one poll about millennials that have come out, one very fresh half from yesterday, and you found some really interesting things, specifically as it pertains to Hillary Clinton. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So just to set the stage just a little bit, we've been doing this for 16 years. So this is our 30th edition of the survey that I work with undergraduates at Harvard, at the Institute of Politics. And we found some, what I would consider actually startling news about Hillary Clinton when I look at the data from this set relative to April as well. So big picture, she holds a significant but diminishing lead, okay, in a two-way horse race against Donald Trump. In April, she was up by 36. Today, she's up by about 26, kind of part one. Part two is when we expand that to look at a three-way race with Gary Johnson versus a two-way race. Gary Johnson actually takes more of his votes from Hillary, than he does from Trump. About 9%, 9 of his points, of his 14 points from Hillary, 5 of his 14 points are from Trump, right? And she's had a tough time the last several months, and this survey was actually conducted before the FBI director's announcement. And we saw her overall net favorable, decrease by 13 points during that time period. The rest of the race looks pretty stable. Trump, his unfavorables are very high. They continue to be very high. Sanders, he maintains to be very popular, but she's had a very tough couple of months.
Why do you think that is? I mean, we saw sort of a surge in excitement around Hillary, I think, especially of women of a generation above millennials. We did see, some considerable excitement from millennials as well. What's going on here? What do you think brought about this change?
I think that it's really about the overall narrative. I mean, Bernie Sanders, and I think it's also relative to Bernie Sanders, right? Bernie Sanders, when we did a poll about 14 months ago, he was at 1%. Okay,
right.
So he kind of caught this generation in many parts of America, kind of
surf that wave, yeah.
Right, and she's compared now to him. So he's authentic in the minds of young people, right? From his biography, his narrative, all the way to his policy position. So I think it's an issue related to trust. Now, I will say though that when we break down women by gender, by age, by other variables, something even more startling, I think, appears. And when I look at young women by race, her overall favorability among young African-American women between 18 and 29 is in the high 50s, 58%.
Right.
Among young Hispanic women, it's in the high 40s, close to 50%, about 45%. But when I look at young white millennials in America, Hillary Clinton's favorability is 22%.
Wow.
22%. Her unfavorable is 71%. And when I flip the page of my crosstabs, I looked at Donald Trump's, it's exactly the same.
Wow. Okay,
so there's an issue not just with women generally, but specifically focused on young white women in America.
When some of the other takeaways from the poll included a sort of millennial agenda of sorts that you guys were able to draw from your
Yep.
polling. Number one was grow the economy. This is a priority. 2, reduce terrorism at home and abroad. 3, unite Americans to address inequality on every front. 4, inspire the post 9/11 unified America that we saw in the days immediately following the disaster. And number 5, reduce the role of big money in politics. So my question to you is, that's an ambitious agenda, first of all.
Right.
And second of all, can you speak sort of monolithically about millennials and their agenda, given these divides you just talked about by virtue of race, et cetera?
Yes. The inputs to that agenda, we had about 9 or 10 kind of questions that we asked folks, 1,001 young people, 18 to 29-year-olds, to rate in terms of first priority, second priority, third priority. We really wanted to try to build a consensus. Mm-hmm. And I think, for example, on the economy, like a Democrat and Republican may have a very different view in terms of how to stimulate the economy. Economy is number one for Democrats, Republicans, Independents. So these are consensus, I think, in terms of the top issues facing kind of millennials in terms of how they want to vote. Now, the policy prescriptions were obviously quite different, but when I look at especially independent voters and undecided voters, those are the big 5 issues. To me, what's interesting is 2 of those are very tangible. Right. Curb terror and improve the economy. The other 2, right, 3 and 4, are kind of intangible, right? They want to be united. They want it to be okay.
And in this season, post 9/11 unified America is about as far as we are. I mean, we are as far from that point as we have been in a long time.
So, in fact, when I'm looking at kind of the post-Brexit conversations, right? We hear about one country. So I'll be interested the latter days of this convention and next week if there's some sense of trying to bringing us together, because young people want to engage, right? I wouldn't be surprised if more young people volunteer than vote in this election. Volunteer like in their communities. You'll have about half of this generation, 18 to 29s, vote. Probably more than that, volunteering in their communities on a regular basis, trying to make their communities and the country better, right? They care, they want to be more involved, but they just, I think, need to be further inspired, and hopefully addressing some of those topics can get them there.
I wanted to ask you too, what did you find in terms of the enthusiasm of voters? I think a recent Pew poll has said that 59% of American adults are already feeling exhausted by this campaign, and we're still more than 100 days from Election Day. Was that something you found among millennial women voters as well?
Yeah, there's a significant difference based upon kind of what your ideology is. So young liberal women, okay, 2/3 of them say they'll definitely vote. Okay. Yeah. Young conservative women, it's under 50%, closer to 42, 45%. So there's an enthusiasm gap just based on liberal versus conservative, and there's clearly kind of an enthusiasm gap, when I look at the kind of the 3 campaigns. So when we ask young women who are Trump voters, small number of them, very, very enthusiastic. Hillary's folks are enthusiastic as well, not to the same extent as Trump. The Gary Johnson voters, not at all enthusiastic. In fact, the majority of them are not enthusiastic. They don't know him. They prefer not to vote for him. They prefer to have, I think, a more traditional option, which they're not really seeing right now.
What's a stronger driver for voting among millennials, love or hate?
I think right now it's hate, right? Yeah. Right now it's hate. They want to be loved. I mean, look at what Sanders did, right? It was a great relationship in terms of he gave them in terms of some policies to get excited about. We'll talk about capitalism in a second. And they gave him crowds. And it went back and forth. So that's what they're looking for. I also was fortunate. I did a quick survey.
But that's connection.
That's
driven by,
that's passion.
I think, a certain amount of anger, too. Not necessarily hate.
Well, it's passion, right? So maybe there's a combination of all those factors. But I think what motivated them to turn out is their kind of love. I think they love their country. I don't buy. A lot of people think that young people are narcissistic or they're slackers. They do love their country and they want to participate, and they just need to be motivated, as far as I can see.
Did you see any gap in terms of when you were talking about young women being certain that they would vote? I think something that's been talked about with the millennial voter is they are such a powerful force, but will they actually follow through and get to the polls? Is that something that you looked at? And what is that sort of gap between really believing in something and being excited and then following through and actually making it there?
And it's really early, I think, to figure that out. But I saw 2-3 cycles in a row where we saw overall participation among men and women increase. 2004, 2008 increase. 2012, we took a step back, right? 2008, we had 51% of all young people participate, changed 3 red states to blue. elected Obama. 2012, down 6 percentage points.
Is that because of the candidate, do you think? Or maybe this is a why question that we can get into in our next panel. But I read a poll not long ago that said that this generation in terms of its desire to go and actually pull the lever, go into the booth, they are as engaged as previous generations, even baby boomers, but they are not voting. There is a change generationally in the sort of participatory aspect of democracy.
Because they don't trust government. 25% trust Congress, media, Wall Street, and the federal government to do the right thing most or all the time. 25%. Half don't believe the American dream is alive for them personally.
And the majority do not support capitalism.
Yeah, absolutely. So unless those issues are addressed, why would they vote?
How is that possible that you would support Donald Trump, for example, who wrote a book called The Art of the Deal?
A small number of them
and
do.
then not support capitalism?
Small number. They don't support the way in which it's practiced today. They're seeking a kind of a compassionate capitalism, a little Teddy Roosevelt, break up the banks, a little Franklin Roosevelt, provide a social infrastructure is what they're telling me.
It's fascinating.
Thank you.
I think that we'd love to check in with you, certainly, as we kind of build up to Election Day, as we're on that road, and see kind of how these numbers change and how these views shift.
Terrific.
It is fascinating to hear about the kids. I make myself sound
I've
so
got 3 of
old.
them now.
But the millennials. Do you have 3 millennials?
I have 3 millennials.
That's impossible.
It is.
Your hair is so
Gray?
Yeah, but it's long. You're very immediately post-millennial, John. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
It is great to see you. It's
Thank
great
you,
to learn
John.
more about what's happening in our country.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, and now on to our great, fantastic panel of brilliant women to talk about the why of the what. Please welcome first Alex Smith. She is the national chair of the College Republican National Committee.
And then please welcome Lisa Sticken. She's the president of the Republican Women of Greater Cleveland. She's worked extensively with young Republicans in Ohio and across the country, and she has a wedding anniversary coming up. So shout out to her.
The great Elise Jordan is a columnist for Time and a political analyst for NBC and MSNBC. She was most recently a policy advisor and speechwriter to Senator Rand Paul's presidential campaign. Good to see you, Elise.
And next up, we have Leah Lavelle. She's a college student advisor for the National Diversity Coalition for Trump.
Hold on, sorry. I lost my last page. Kaylin, will you do me the honor?
Absolutely. Last up, we have Kristen Soltis Anderson. She's the co-founder of the research and analytics firm Echelon Insights and a Washington Examiner columnist. She's also the author of The Selfie Vote, Where Millennials, are Leading America and How Republicans Can Keep Up. And I want to talk about selfies in the voting booth because that might get more people out there, I think.
It's good to see all of you. Thank you for joining us. And I think it's always great when women can talk about women. It's a change of pace in many ways. So let's first talk about this election, broadly speaking, and how you guys see it shaping millennial voters within the Republican Party as we move into the future. We have a poll out here that says that more than 60% of millennial women say they are scared of Donald Trump. How do you unpack that, and sort of what are the implications for the party going forward? Leah, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. Okay, so I just feel like, millennial women, especially in millennials, should give Donald Trump a chance to really, especially after the convention, listen to his policies and his issues that he puts on the table, because they do affect millennials. His policy of bringing jobs back to America. I'm a college student, so when I graduate, I'm going to be looking for a job, and a lot of us struggle with that. So I think that as the election goes on, you'll see more millennials
get less
Trump.
scared.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Lisa, when we think about the Trump candidacy, it's not, of course, just about the top of the ticket. It's also about down ballot. It's about local and state races. I mean, talk to us as someone that understands that ground game and whether millennials being scared has, whether that scares other people on the ticket.
Well, I think you make a good point. It's not just the president we're voting for. Everything from the president all the way to your county judge. These are important races. The local races even more so, some would argue, because they affect your life and liberty in a daily fashion. So equally important, I would say. But I think it's interesting because you have millennials having these concerns with Donald Trump. You have, I think, some similar concerns with Hillary Clinton. You have them not really supporting her in the primary. And I think you had a very crowded Republican primary, and we had so many candidates with so many ideas. So now I think all the voices are going to calm in a way, because here we're this week nominating someone who's going to give an acceptance speech. We will hear his plan, and this is his chance to reshape his presidency, his candidacy for the presidency. So I think the ball's in his court to make that speech and make that case. And I think he knows that, and I think that could definitely be a game changer.
I actually want to pivot to the member of the Trump family that's on everybody's lips today in particular. Melania Trump obviously made her sort of public debut in terms of her speech last night. There's been a lot of discussion around it since then, similarities to the First Lady's speech. How do you feel that Melania should reach out to young millennial women voters? Does she have a role in that? And what would you like to see her doing in terms of that outreach?
I think that it was actually a really smart pick for last night. So I think that the convention themes each day are actually pretty easy to understand. They're pretty common sense, and I think it's actually going to play well back home with voters who are watching. I know a lot of voters in my home state, my swing state of Pennsylvania, who haven't been engaged in the process. A lot of millennial voters who haven't been really engaged at all, and they're going to be watching every night of this convention because they just don't know what's coming next. But so I think that the themes are actually pretty. They're I think well placed here, and I think that her placement last night was interesting and I think smart, because if you look at where women have some concerns about Donald Trump, it's about temperament. I mean, I'll let the pollsters up here speak to exactly what those concerns are, but it's about temperament. But they also aren't going for Hillary Clinton, and they don't trust her. And so I think that she was a good person on the Make America Safe Again day to basically maybe convince some of those security moms that are on the fence out there that maybe don't know if they can trust him, but they don't trust Hillary Clinton for sure. So I thought she made a pretty eloquent case, the controversies notwithstanding.
Elise, I'd ask you, in terms of the platform that the party's adopted, it's a pretty socially conservative platform, and I think maybe that plays well with white men who are a stronghold for Donald Trump, possibly security moms. I wonder if you think that it is at odds with some of the stated positions of young millennial women as far as the polling we've seen.
I think it's completely at odds, and I think it really hurts the Republican Party that we did this platform this year that is really regressive in a lot of ways. It was regressive on LGBT rights, which is something that millennials really care about. The language on women wasn't softer. In 2012, post-2012, the Republican Party did an autopsy to diagnose, what do we have to do? What is the path going forward for the Republican Party? And specifically, they cited the Republican Party needs to be more welcoming, and it needs to work with women and with youth. And we really just haven't made progress, and I would say we've been backsliding even this year, and the tone and the tenor of the discussion surrounding a lot of these issues really are repulsive to young voters. And I worked for Senator Rand Paul, and clearly I would have liked for this week to have been about him, but he would have won the primary if it had just been millennial voters. His stances on privacy, his more libertarian views were really attractive to young voters, and I think that it's something that the Republican Party as a whole could really learn from.
On that note, what do you make of Trump's decision to bring on Pence as his running mate? Did that alienate some young women voters based on his stances on things like reproductive rights and LGBT rights?
You want me to get that again?
Go for it.
Yes, I don't think that it's not a youth-friendly choice, and Donald Trump must win essentially every single white voter, and that's going to be very difficult to do in any year. So I just think that he really has put out, there are a lot of obstacles on the path, and it really breaks down to numbers. And I was talking to a leading Republican pollster yesterday, and his specific concern with millennials is that Donald Trump is viewed as intolerant. Now he has great people like you working for him, and you can work to change that narrative, but how much damage has been done to this point, and how much is that really sunk in with millennial voters?
Kristen, how malleable are millennial views? I mean, we won't know this for certain, but could you start out as someone who is at odds with the Republican platform in this convention and grow into a security mom, or are these the sort of values that shape millennials through the decades?
No, the conventional wisdom is that, it's this line that people attribute to Winston Churchill incorrectly, that if you're young and conservative, you have no heart, and if you're old and liberal, you have no brain. This idea that everybody starts off idealistic and liberal and becomes conservative as reality sets in and they get older. But nowadays, the sort of life cycle is different. So things that people were doing to, quote unquote, become full-fledged adults at age 24 or 25 a couple of decades ago are now choices that aren't even being made until the early to mid 30s, if at all. Decisions like buying a home, getting married, having kids, et cetera. These are things that tended to correlate with being more conservative, but now millennials are deferring them. So you've now got folks who are voting 2, 3, 4 times before they ever really hit those milestones that are supposed to make someone wake up and become conservative, which is meaning that you've got folks that are really building a loyalty to a worldview and a way of thinking that I think makes it very important for Republicans not just to wait for people to get older and to age into their politics, but rather reach out to people, meet them where they are when they're younger, meet them where with the specific economic concerns they have, talk about things like, why does college cost so much in America? Why do we feel so unsafe in America? Why do things feel so unstable? Talk to people where they're at instead of just sort of crossing our fingers and hoping that once they turn 50, they'll change that voter registration card.
We're going to nab them when they're 50.
I mean, we're lucky enough to have some millennials on our panel. I mean, Leah, when you're doing that kind of outreach and talking to, friends and peers, is it an uphill battle to say, hey, guys, vote for Trump?
I would say that it's not, because, at this age, people are trying to figure out who they are and the values that they stand for. So really just having panels like this, town halls, that's something that I'm working on in the fall at HBCUs. Just events like that. Young people love to get involved and learn new things. So I feel like it's been a pretty positive experience. It's just been a learning process.
I love your optimism and sense of can do. I would ask you, Alex, to respond to some of the stuff Elise was saying, though, that she feels like the party isn't putting its best foot forward, if you will. And as a woman who's very involved in this moment, do you feel like enough young women are being heard inside the Republican Party?
Well, we want more young women involved inside of the Republican Party, that's for sure. And I don't mean just in terms of the pageantry of the convention and the platform committee. I want more women in Congress. I want 10 more Elise Stefanik's. I want 20 more Joni Ernst, okay? So, when we're talking about the platform and what's kind of going on there, this is a narrow group of individuals that's putting words to paper on both sides. On the Democratic Party side, too. I'm sure they have something. I know they have some things on there that would not be.
Well, but I would think the Democrats might be in some ways, there's a sense that the sort of progressive younger wing has been more shaping Hillary's message than.
My point being is that I think that the platform itself is not something from which a younger conservative would derive his or her principles about why he or she is a conservative or why he or she is a Republican. Right. And so I think that, what I think about sort of the differing views between what the platform might say, what older conservatives might say, and then what younger Republican millennials are saying is that, first of all, there's room in our party for all of us, whereas in the Democratic Party, there's one party chairman who's deciding one candidate and forcing one process down everyone's throat. We had a big conversation in the Republican Party. We vetted 17 candidates. More millennials participated in the primary contest on our side than ever before. So we see at the Republican National Convention here that more young people decided to run for delegates and to become delegates themselves so that they could participate. So there is an increase in sort of enthusiasm, I think, in some ways. And I think that the second point is that while our party, while what's on paper, some older conservatives might say about some of the issues where young people feel differently, is that we might think differently about those issues, but we don't disrespect our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation. We respect what they have to say. We're looking for an open and honest dialogue. We're looking for people to engage with us on the issues where we are, and not hide who they are. I don't think that Republican politicians should become someone different just to engage with young people. I think authenticity is incredibly important to this generation, and they should be who they say they are, and they should talk to young people about the issues that matter to them right now the most, which by any poll and any standard is the economy and its jobs.
I have a question for you, Lisa. In terms of, Alex makes a great point. There were 17 candidates on the Republican side.
Yes.
And some people thought, oh, it's crazy. But I actually thought, wow, that is incredibly impressive.
Right.
That they have a deep bench. You look at the governors. Republicans have made massive inroads in
Right.
state legislatures and governorships. Democrats, the narrative is, young people vote progressive, they vote Democrat. But when you talk about who's running for office and the ways in which the parties have developed a sort of state network, Republicans are blowing Democrats out of the water. So why is it, to your mind, that we believe, and voting patterns show that young people are voting sort of progressive, but they're not actually conservatives are winning the race in terms of personnel, if you will?
And personalities too.
Yeah.
I know many millennials and even just Democrats I know who are avidly they were like, oh my God, the debates tonight, Republican debate, I can't wait to see. And they were just watching every debate religiously, and they were listening to our ideas and different candidates, and they enjoyed it. And I got a lot of good feedback, or people who were even, I would say, not politically inclined telling me, I really like Marco Rubio, or I like Donald Trump, I like his style. And that's good. It's a good discussion to have. And actually, that was a good thing to have people so interested in our debates, those ratings. Then you had the Democrat debate on a Saturday night buried, So that exposure did help the party. Also for millennials, I think if you even look at the 2012 election, we had that war on women theme that the Democrats were trying to use against Mitt Romney. I think that kind of, maybe there's shades of that, but I think we're going in a different direction. I kind of call this the change agent election, because I think people are looking for something different. That's why Bernie did so well, in my humble opinion, and then I think that's why Donald Trump did so well as well. So I think people are looking maybe for new ideas outside of DC, perhaps.
But you guys also have a tight game in terms of recruitment, right? Just give us a window into that.
Well, I think the Republicans have done a very good job to make sure we had strong governors, candidates, and they really targeted those elections, also the Senate, to make sure we had the majority there. And I think those are important races, good candidates, really. That's half the battle is having a good candidate who can win. And I also think we concentrate on that. Swing states like our own Ohio, where we're here and happy to host you. We know how to bring swing state voters in, and we know it's showtime for us. We have a very important Senate race, Senator Portman, so we're all in on that.
I'm really interested, Kristen, when I think about that recruitment question, is it that the sort of anti-institutionalism of the left has maybe led to fewer people running for office because there is this widespread distrust in government, or am I making that up?
Well, but I think there's the possibility for it to cut the other way, if you think about it. If conservatives generally are skeptical that government is a great way to solve problems, then if you're young and you're conservative and you want to solve a problem, then something like starting a business kind of makes sense. If you think, well, the private sector is really good at solving problems, I'll do that. So that same kind of dynamic in a with a twist on it, you can also see on the right. And so the challenge, I think, on both sides is to say, is it okay if young people are civically engaged because they're getting involved in service in their community, because they're getting involved in issues in their community, even if they're not running for office or part of the traditional system? I think that's an interesting debate to have. If people are saying, I want to solve a problem, but maybe not by putting my name on the ballot for town council, instead, I'm going to start a nonprofit, or instead, I'm going to go do Teach for America, or instead, I'm going to start a company where we have this dual bottom line. I think that's really interesting. And as someone who is a conservative and is, I'm not an anarchist, I think government should exist, I think government has a role, but I think you can also solve problems in really interesting ways through the private sector, through nonprofits. I don't know that I'm gravely concerned if more people are turning there to solve problems, but certainly we do need more young people in the offices that we have. And I would be, right now the average age in Congress is lower for Republicans than for Democrats.
Yeah.
But in some ways, age is nothing but a number. Are you?
Thank you for
are
saying
you
that.
exuding? Just because you on average are younger, does that necessarily mean
That you have younger.
that you have younger views? And I think there is, in some ways, generational change that's happening in the GOP. So we've talked a lot about the platform. There's a young woman, Rachel Hoff, who is friends of many of us up here on stage, first openly gay delegate on the platform committee, and fought the fight to try to have a different position on LGBT rights. Now, she was unsuccessful in that fight this time around, but this debate is happening in the party. There's not just one way to be a Republican, and I think there is generational change that is coming, but slowly.
I want to just sort of piggyback off of what you said, because I think it's incredibly exciting and interesting to think about how, on the whole, we can get more young women involved in politics. One of the things that I think is always interesting and fascinating about conventions, other than the amazing rhinestone hats and buttons and
They are amazing.
free swag, is the fact that this is really a way for young women, well, young people in general, but young women as well, to sort of network and make those connections within the party. How would you all here like to see more young women engaged with and encouraged to run for office on all levels of the ballot?
Well, I would say personally, I started working for local campaigns. I remember my first campaign I ever worked on was my dad's campaign in 2008. I was probably 12 years old. And from there, I went to intern in Congress and in Senate, and then now I'm here with Donald Trump's campaign. So I would just say, starting from the bottom, basically, and building connections, and so we can all set an example for other women that to run for office or become surrogates or campaign managers.
Lisa, I mean, you work at with politics on the
Right.
local level here in Ohio. How do you do that outreach to young women? And what are some of your best practices or tips for people who might be watching this and want to do the same?
Well, I remember when I started, it was at a very young age. I was in the 6th grade, and I was stuffing envelopes. And then I kind of got discussion, like, what is this about? Who is this person? And it's just discussing, I think, bringing the discussion to younger women, talking to them about politics, kind of in an open manner, because I think if someone is not politically inclined, you don't want to just be like, here's my views, I'm pushing them on you. You want to have a good discussion and see what their interests are. I think that's one way to do it. But I believe in mentorship very tremendously. Mentorship is the way to go, I think. I am on city council here in Cuyahoga County, and I know that I'm always talking to other women about maybe running and getting involved that way. That's a great way to get your foot in the door in terms of local government, but just volunteering on campaigns too. So I think that's another good way, is just get them involved, whether it's a judge race or a mayor race. I mean, that's politics 101 there, and I think you'll see it grow.
Elise, what's the biggest mistake politicians make, do you think, when they're trying to talk to young women?
Assuming that abortion is the only topic that they care about. Because overwhelmingly, young women that I've met just on the campaign trail, it's not single issue voters, and Republican women especially, I would say the economy is their number one concern.
Young women
I would think just paint with young women. I would say painting in too broad of a stroke that, that one issue is what's going to pull out the woman vote.
Alex, is there any way in which politicians should be talking to young women that they aren't? Avenues, social media, I mean, there's a lot of debate about how you actually reach these women. How do you, what are we not doing?
I mean, half the battle is just showing up, and I think where we have been getting our head handed to us over the last couple of election cycles is on campus and online. The Democrats make an active effort to go there. They show up, they talk to people. For the sort of vaunted Obama digital operation that's often talked about, it was paired with an equally aggressive ground operation on campus that, of course, the data facilitated and helped to finesse in a lot of ways. But I mean, it was about peer-to-peer relationships, going from dorm to dorm, knowing who it was around you that might be also inclined to vote for President Obama for a second time around. So those relationships matter on campus. It matters that we go online, but it also matters that we go with a culturally resonant message. I think if we can get our ads on Hulu, that's great. If it looks like the same ad that you're going to run on TV, not so great.
Right.
I mean, I think that from the research that we've done with Kristen, actually, we've seen that a lot of the people that we talk to in focus groups and surveys, they see those spots as wholly inauthentic. It's politics as usual. They don't want a part of it because it feels like the same old negative ad that they've been rejecting. So you have to find new ways. Maybe that means bringing in pop culture. Maybe that means just bringing in something in a more lighthearted way or a different kind of way. But it can't look like the same old stuff that's been tried before.
Okay, we're going to take a couple questions from the audience. If you have a question, and I'm sure you do, raise your wine glass. No, raise your hand. And I think we have mics running around. Right here. Third row back. If you could just state your name, that'd be great. And where you're from, if you want. It's not on.
Right. Oh, there we are. I'm Alexandra Svokos. I'm a reporter for Elite Daily. We're a millennial publication. And I'm just wondering, for Republican women, how do you kind of talk to young women and young women voters about a candidate like Trump, who is well documented to have said a lot of rather misogynistic things and objectifying things about women?
Leah, since you're on the front lines of that.
You're on the cusp.
Well, I can say, there's been a lot of talk on media about how Trump words things and everything. And as far as, people are concerned people are concerned about jobs, about student loans, and about the safety of our country. So I feel like, those issues are just as important to millennial women as they are to all Americans. So once we get past all the liberal media, and get to the issues, then people will see that, Trump is for millennial women and everybody.
Kristen, can I just ask you a follow-up on that? Is as a technique to reach people, taking the issues away from the candidate and saying, do you care about X, Y, and Z? Well, if you do, then you should be supporting this person. Do you think in this sort of media environment?
I mean, I think it's hard to do, but I think it's especially going to be important for Republicans who are not Donald Trump, who are further down the ballot, folks who are running for governor, for senator, who understand that, look, in some places, there are going to be states like a Colorado or a Florida in particular where we see Donald Trump is struggling in the polls. But certainly, there are other folks on the ballot there who are Republican, and you don't want to completely run away, throw your own nominee under the bus, but at the same time say, look, this person speaks for themselves and I speak for myself, and this is where I stand on the issues. I think, to your earlier question about what are the things that people should do to best reach young women, I think don't condescend to them. I think treat them like adults who understand issues and care about issues and want to make sure that the economy is growing and want to make sure that their country is safe. And you don't just have to make everything pink and say like, okay, well, we won young vote, we won young women now. And I think that will go to help folks who are not Donald Trump and who are facing an electoral environment where that is a real concern, where there are voters who are like, maybe I like low taxes, maybe I want a strong national defense, but I'm concerned about these things Donald Trump said. I think that by keeping the focus on the issues, that's the best possible way to sort of get around that.
Hi, I'm Christy Andrasik. So my question is, this whole concept of millennials to begin with, I think that a lot of times we think we're just talking about an age group, but really when we're defining folks, we're certainly defining a social definition. Because I would like to know how many of us think of a millennial and we think of a 22-year-old woman with a 4-year-old child who's riding the bus every day to get to her job at Burger King and taking her child to childcare using a childcare voucher, and how much we really are speaking to that woman as a millennial voter, and how much we're really thinking about marginalized populations and not just women who have the privilege of the rights that we've had that have been built on the backs of women who have come before us, such as Hillary Clinton and others, but women who are not experiencing that level of privilege. And are we really thinking about them when we say millennial voters?
I think that's what is a millennial as we talk about it. At least when you're talking about a millennial Who do you
Because
picture in your
I'm
mind?
technically barely a millennial. And
Well, it is
I would say
fungible.
there's a ton of difference between
Yeah.
what I'm concerned with and what the 22-year-old voter is concerned with. And so I do think the word millennial has elitist connotations, and we see it as, kind of a Sheryl Sandberg, modern class.
Sheryl herself, but
not
yes.
Sheryl herself, but the type of woman that she was. Yeah, that would be great if millennials were all like Sheryl Sandberg.
Yeah.
But so I do think that we tend to paint it in too broad of strokes, but I think that's going to be the this is the
Or too narrow,
as you
perhaps.
certainly know, this is the group that everyone in the world wants to figure
So there,
out.
there are 80 million people that technically meet the definition of millennial in America. 80 million is such a huge number that you can't lump them all
What is
together.
the age group, just
it's
to clarify?
technically if you were born in the 80s and 90s. I mean, it's like I think it
18
differs.
to 35.
Yeah, roughly 18 to 35. So, but when you ask people who technically meet that definition, do you consider yourself a millennial? Only 40% say yes. The millennial generation is terribly down on itself because every time you open up a newspaper, the stories about millennials are that they're selfish, they're entitled, they don't work, et cetera, et cetera. But in all of the research I've done, I've never found that that's actually true or what really does define this generation. Instead, I think this is a generation that is very focused on caring and very focused on empathy and very focused on justice and equality and are treating everybody fairly. And whether it's somebody who's had a very privileged life or somebody who has faced a lot of struggle, I think folks are looking broadly across the millennial generation, again, painting with this really broad brush, they're looking for someone that wants to make sure that everybody's just treated fairly and that people are kind to those of other walks of life. The research that I did with Alex, we asked college students, so not all millennials, but these were college students, what is the most important characteristic to you for somebody running for office? And we gave them 30 different options. And overwhelmingly, number one was they want someone who's going to be kind to people of all walks of life and take aggressive action to ensure equality. And this was not just liberal millennials. This was people sort of across the political spectrum. So I think that kind of empathy and fighting to make sure everybody gets a fair shot is important to millennials across the board.
Yeah, and I would say to the 18 to 35 designation, people who were, I can't do the math, people who were 3 years old when 9/11 happened are going to have a very different idea about national security than people who were in their 20s or 19, right? Am I doing the math right? I think. That was so much arithmetic. But it is, to your point, the struggles and the priorities are gonna really be different. It's been a crazy last 20 years. On that note, we have to wrap it up, but thank you guys all for coming. I have a few announcements. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Tomorrow at 9, we have 2 great conversations, including voices from across the Republican, the Walk of Stars in the Republican convention. Congressman Tom Cole, former Congressman Vin Weber, Amy Walter from Cook Political Report, and former Utah Governor Mike Leavitt. They'll all be here, so please stop on by. And we're going to be talking about the kinds of policy priorities we can expect from a Trump White House. And I think I'm moderating this one, a look at Trump, Twitter, and how the man communicates, which is sure to be exciting. And of course, you can catch us. For those of you who are bipartisan enough to come to both conventions, we will be doing the same thing, another Refinery29 event in Philly at the DNC. So thank you for coming, and thank you guys.
Thank you.